Coming up in today's newscast, the United States reportedly prepares to cut more funding to UNRWA. Palestinian Authority President Abbas says yes to a demilitarized state, but over my dead body to brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And an Israeli-Bedouin community finally gets reprieve from the heat with their first ever swimming pool.
The Trump administration is said to be gearing up for a shocking policy shift. Word is that in the coming days, the White House will announce the end of all aid money to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency. This follows last week's decision by Team Trump to slash $200 million of funding to the Palestinians, all decisions that may greatly alter the current status quo in the Middle East.
Until now, the United States has been the single biggest donor to the Palestinians Refugee Agency. UNRWA was first founded in 1949 following the end of Israel's 1948 independence war. That war, of course, concluded with the founding of the Jewish state known as Israel, but it also forced over 250,000 Palestinians out of their native homes and into refugee camps all over the Middle East. Unlike many refugee groups, the UN recognizes the descendants of these original refugees. Only several thousand Palestinians from that original expulsion are alive today, some 70 years later though, with roughly 5 million Palestinians today recognized as refugees total. This, in and of itself, is an issue of fierce debate. Israel has argued that this distinction is seemingly granted only to the Palestinians, but others point out that millions of descendants have lived in refugee camps for all of their lives, and that this status is the only thing keeping them alive. But as if doubling down on Trump's apparent plan to defund UNRWA altogether, United States Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley has signaled that the entire Palestinian claim to their right of return to their native lands should be off the table entirely in future peace talks. Again, this question is not a simple one. Palestinians today, similar to Jews until 1948, maintain that they have an inalienable right to return to their native homeland after being forced into exile. But for Israeli leaders, the integration of millions of Palestinians back into the country would mean the end of the Jewish majority nation state that they hoped to build in the first place. These latest decisions by the Trump administration may have a different impact entirely, however. Israeli defense officials, as well as former U.S. officials, have warned that the defunding of UNRWA will actually shift power from the PA to Hamas, giving the terror group far more influence to commit violence. The collapse of the West Bank funding and infrastructure could create a power vacuum that Hamas would be very quick and keen to fill.
Aside from the acts of Palestinian violence against Israeli civilians, one of the biggest issues at the heart of the Israel-Palestine debate is the Israeli settlement enterprise. Well, in a landmark decision, the Jerusalem District Court has just ruled in favor of legalizing the Mitzpeh Kamin outpost in the West Bank, despite parts of it being reportedly stolen from private Palestinian land. The reasoning is that the land upon which the outpost sits was seized in good faith, meaning that the developers who purchased the land didn't know it was stolen. The ruling sets a precedent that is likely to have far-reaching implications, and here to discuss further is legal advisor to the Israeli Movement for Governability and Democracy, or Meshilut, Attorney Simcha Rotman. Thank you so much for coming in again.
Hi, good day.
Thanks for coming back. All right, so Simcha, first of all, do you agree with the court's ruling?
I think you can't rule anyway else. I think it's the reasonable and the most probable ruling ever made on these issues. And the reason is very clear. This outpost was moved to the current place it's sitting by the order of the government of Israel. And it was part of a settlement that the settlers there were told to move there because the previous place where they lived was deemed illegal. So the government put them there, and the map there are everyone who reads this ruling, the maps are not accurate. You don't know where the land starts and where the land begins, and where it ends. You don't know anything there. The land law in Judea and Samaria was not changed since the Ottoman Empire time, and you really don't know
we have
what's the status
Accords,
of
we have Oslo II, we have
Area
A, B, and C.
It doesn't have anything to do with the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords do not settle the idea who owns a specific lot of land. And to figure out this ruling for many pages shows how complicated it is just to get the simple answer, who owns the land?
But didn't the ruling conclude that yes, part of the land was stolen, but it was sold in good faith?
They said you don't know what was part of the government property and what was private.
But did they acknowledge that part of it was private?
Yes. And the people who got it from the government in good faith and built their homes on it should get, and the same
But
law.
you don't see a problem with that? With someone saying, oh, well, you bought it, but you didn't know it was stolen. It's still stolen.
That's the rule in Israel. That's the rule everywhere else in the world. If you buy a land and you build your house on it, and then you discover that due to no error from your side, there were some mistakes in the way the land measure or whatever, and you built your house on it, you're supposed to pay the owner of the land whatever compensation he needs, but you don't demolish a house or a whole community because of someone did not measure the land properly.
Okay. I'm going to hold you to this because, when you have, let's say the reverse happened, that in Area B,
it happens all the time.
The PA gave the Palestinian Authority land.
Happens all the time.
They fake documents and sell pieces of land that don't belong to them?
We're not talking about fake documents. You don't.
Well, the fake ownership, which was then sold to the developers, those are forged documents.
No, we're not talking about forged documents. That's something that many people do not understand. Land in Judea and Samaria were the lines were drawn by the Ottoman Empire. You don't really know where the land starts and where it ends. And because of that, many mistakes are inevitable. You can't find anything straight there, and because of that, there are mistakes, and because of that, everyone who acts in good faith, and that's the law. Exactly the same law happens in Israel. Exactly the same law happens in the U.S. If you bought your house on the land that it's not yours, and you acted in good faith, you pay the owner and you keep your house. That's the way it goes everywhere in the world, within Israel and in Judea and Samaria, and shouldn't be any different. The only difference is, and this ruling shows it, that for many, many years, the same government entity that put the settlers there, basically didn't let them do what every good faith seller. Basically, it was sold from the government, but the management of Judea and Samaria acted not in good faith. The court said this specifically and made people who bought their house from the government in good faith suffer for many, many years with the same government blocking them. And that was the ruling. That was the ruling showed that some people, I don't know what their intention was, but some people in the military management of civil management of Judea and Samaria, someone there acted not in good faith, but not when he gave the land. When after he gave the land in good faith, he put all the trouble he can on the way of the people who bought there with good faith.
Okay, but we're talking about a developer who buys in good faith, but the land was taken potentially not.
No, that's what the court said. It wasn't a bad faith. Okay. That's what the court said. So you can't measure the land.
Well, so what about the 1967 borders? We don't have measurements there. We don't have
1967 borders have nothing to do with it.
Definitions anywhere.
1967 borders have nothing to do with it, and that's what the court ruled today. He said that the same rules that apply within 1967 borders and outside, the same rules should apply either if you are Jewish, either if you are an Arab, and you shouldn't treat Jewish settlers as enemies of the state. Okay, and that's what happened for many, many years.
But still, okay, let's take away Palestinian land. Let's the Palestinian issue from the table, from the lexicon here of this issue, and let's move it into Tel Aviv. Let's say somebody signs a document and he says, "Hey," and then he sells a piece of land that he doesn't own.
The law in Israel says that if you buy a land in good faith from someone and you acted on the behalf, you read
the people living. So let's say
then you don't demolish the house. That's what happened within Israel.
But okay, let's say there's a landowner and he's renting out the space. Okay, I'm a renter in an apartment, and then somebody forges a document, sends something off, says I own this land, and he sells it, and suddenly I have a new landlord and he can kick me out.
That's the rule in Israel, as land law in Israel. The same rules. It's not anything new. If you bought a land in good faith and you checked all the checks that you can do, and you have to understand, in this case, the civil administration was acting not in good faith, and they said you have to ask the owners. Ask the owners, bring them here to court. That's what they told the settlers. So the settlers said, okay, bring them into court. So give us their names. So the civil administration said, no, we are not giving the names. It was acting in bad faith, and to hurt the settlements. And Baruch Hashem, with God's help, the settlement was proved to be legal.
All right, Simcha, and thank you for coming in. All right, Ezra Gershi is an ultra-Orthodox man and the mayor of the Israeli settlement town of Emmanuel. Gershi's reputation as mayor is riddled with allegations of abusing his powers, but those arguments just entered an entirely new legal plateau. Gershi has just been charged by an Israeli court with illegally influencing the 2013 election that made him mayor.
And this is a truly shocking charge with massive implications. Police apparently have gathered evidence that in the lead up to the 2013 mayoral election, Gershi promised members of the community's local Chabad movement high-paying jobs if they elected him mayor. He apparently paid in cash an upfront of nearly $82,000 in order to essentially buy their votes. This arrangement, and the failure to legally disclose it, amounts to a serious and unlawful influence of a major political election. One Chabad official has also been indicted on these charges, though his or her name remains under gag order. This is perhaps the biggest in a long list of controversial allegations that have long surrounded Gershi. The settlement of Emmanuel is a relatively small community of only roughly 3,000 people. As a result, everyone knows and sees everything. Earlier this year, members of the community allegedly captured Gershi on videotape flicking a switch in his personal home before bed, which deactivated street lamps around the neighborhood. The community alleges that he rigged this illegal system in order to help himself sleep better with less light pollution from the streetlights. Needless to say, the tampering of an election is a very serious crime, one which throws the very pillars of democracy into jeopardy.
With a lot of question marks still hanging over matters like the United States peace proposal, Palestinian reconciliation, and a potential Hamas-Israel ceasefire, the times have rarely seemed so uncertain. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has remained somewhat silent on a lot of these issues, and that is until now. LTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the update. Brett?
Hey, thanks, Aaron. So yeah, there's a lot of unresolved questions hanging in the air, and oftentimes you only get a little taste of what's really going on behind the scenes in the form of, on the record and off the record comments from politicians, officials, etc. So that brings us to Abbas. Abbas has just told a group of Israeli academics that in agreeing with past Israeli demands, he would fully back the terms of a future Palestinian state without a Palestinian army. Now, this position isn't anything new in and of itself. Abbas actually said the same thing back in 2013 when the Obama administration was, of course, attempting to spearhead Israeli-Palestinian peace back then. So those talks, of course, ultimately hit a dead end, as we know, for reasons that we'll probably never fully know. The U.S. Special Envoy reportedly did place a lot of the blame on Israel's refusal to budge from their side, but the State Department did say even back then that both sides were very, very unhelpful in trying to meet in the middle there.
All right, so obviously Abbas's words, like any public statements, should probably, always be taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
These comments are typically part of an overall strategy, if nothing else. So if that's the case, then even if Abbas is true to his word, what would be the strategy behind making these comments right now?
Right, sure. So it's probably twofold. One, Trump has repeatedly slashed Palestinian aid money ahead of that promise to give Palestinians a sweet deal following his recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He says it's now the Palestinians' turn for something good. So from the Palestinian point of view, Trump and the U.S. are absolutely not objective negotiators any longer. In fact, Israeli officials even say that the defunding of UNRWA, as we talked about today, whether you believe in that agency's value or not, will have likely a very diminishing effect on Abbas's power and shift it probably to Hamas. And that's exactly why the second message here on these comments is that it's about internal Palestinian struggle, right, between Hamas and Abbas's Fatah party. So reconciliation is obviously not happening anytime soon. In fact, Hamas now seems itself gaining ground with Israel in the form of that potential ceasefire deal. Maybe that's not going to happen, maybe yes, but that dialogue undermines Abbas's position to begin with. So this is really about Abbas wanting to retain power as the predominant Palestinian face and leader here at a time when Hamas might really becoming emboldened, due in no small part, I got to add, to the Trump administration and their decisions.
All right, well, it will be interesting to see exactly what's in Trump's proposal for the Israeli-Palestinian peace deal,
Sure.
If and when it actually arrives. Trump has promised that his ultimate deal will require both sides to make compromises that likely no one will actually be fully pleased with. And Prime Minister Netanyahu recently said that he felt no rush in getting that plan on the table anyway. But maybe with Abbas in questionable health, the Palestinian leader may indeed be feeling a rush.
Sure.
So in any event, thanks for the update, Brett.
Of course.
Israeli forces have just announced the discovery of a large, potentially complex Hamas terror cell operating in the West Bank city of Hebron. While this is already a unique case due to the large size of the cell operating in territory operated by the Palestinian Authority, it's unique for another key reason. Hamas apparently recruited Palestinian women from Hebron in order to facilitate terror planning and activities. Hamas and other extremist Islamic-motivated groups have typically prohibited women from any such military operations for a variety of reasons. So this may be the first significant known use of women for Hamas-related operations. The cell was busted in a joint Shin Bet IDF and Israeli police task force some time ago, and criminal indictments for several Hamas operatives have already been submitted to the courts. The women in question are believed to have been used by Hamas for the purposes of laundering money in and out of the West Bank, as well as collecting and transferring secret intelligence. At the head of this women's unit is none other than the wife of a known Palestinian terrorist who murdered 4 Israelis back in 2010 and was killed by security teams shortly thereafter. Now, it's interesting to note that this reveal comes mere days after a landmark ruling from Israel's High Court allowing the transfer of 5 female relatives of Hamas members to seek cancer treatments in Israel. The state originally blocked these women from receiving medical care on the basis that they were security threats and that doing so would weaken Israel's position with Hamas. The High Court's judges, however, ruled that using human lives as bargaining chips, especially in the case of these 5 women with no direct links to participating in any terror activities themselves, could not be defended and was illegal according to Israel's own laws. But this news of Hamas adopting new strategies to conducting terror is likely to add a lot of fuel to this debate. Among all the news of attempts to deport African migrants and asylum seekers, the cutting of their salaries, and protests against their being here, a group of young Ugandan Jews from the Abayudaya community were just welcomed to Israel on the first ever Uganda-based birthright trip. Meanwhile, former Israeli Attorney General Yehuda Weinstein and former Israeli UN Ambassador Ron Prosser are now leading the way for Rwanda to join the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD. If approved, Rwanda would be the first African nation to join the 36-member organization. And joining me now with more on these latest developments is Ethiopian-Israeli community activist and educator Shmuel Legesi. Shmuel, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
All right, so my first question: what are your initial reactions? Let's start with the birthright chip, the Ugandan birthright chip. How do you feel about them being here? And
first of all, any kind of act of kindness or love and good, I support, and I really congratulate or be with Abudaya community for seeing them in Jerusalem. It's nice, no objection.
Sure.
And I would say, and Israeli also smart move, but still
too loud.
Yeah, too loud and a little some kind of political show.
So that's kind of what I want to get into. On the one hand, the Abayudaya group, they kept a lot of their trip under wraps until really the last second. They were worried that maybe they would get stopped at the border, that they wouldn't be allowed to continue their trip, but they were thankfully finally let through. Now, putting that aside, how do you see that versus maybe the mistreatment, we could say, of the Ethiopian community and African asylum seekers here in Israel, like, say, in the Balkan wine incident?
You see, there is a big issue right here. The issue is the Israeli government tried to differentiate between internal affairs and international community, like diplomacy and relationship. But normally can't really separate. It's all the same. If you treat anyone, your own citizen, you have to treat them right. And for me, it's some kind of game. Because, like, for example, you have a child who is maybe has some kind of special need. Now, you go to your neighbor when you are abusing or abandon your own special need kids in the house. You go to your neighbor, you would ask like to babysit for them or to provide some kind of care for. It's that kind of game. You have your own people, African origin, Jewish, and they are not treated right. Even though at the same time we are thankful to our nation, to Israel, and we really love, and we are all Zionists, and we really love, but the problem is the treatment is not right. For example, now I can tell you before yesterday, the last 4 weeks, there is demonstration, crying, Ethiopian Jewish, left over their family to come. This is army standing with Israeli flag on one hand, Israeli armed on the other hand, and giving his life to his nation, but at the same time, he has a brother and sister and family in Ethiopia. They are crying to come and waiting for how long? Maybe 20 years. Look at it. Yeah. It's not fair. There's no justice here.
All right, now, Shmuel, we're going to keep this going, online. Unfortunately, I have to cut off the interview right now. But stick with us. We're gonna keep talking. We're gonna continue this conversation later. All right?
Thank you.
All right. So make sure you tune in online later, and make sure you catch the rest of this interview. Now, I know right now it's summer, but if you will, try and think ahead to the winter. In wintertime, Israelis obviously don't want to chill out with a scoop of ice cream. Instead, we actually have a delicious seasonal snack here called Crimbo, which is only made in the winter. And now Crimbo is getting a little sweet makeover in effort to help the country go green.
So the best way to describe Crimbo is like a cookie with a big marshmallow on top, covered in a layer of crisp chocolate. Israelis all argue about the best way to eat a Crimbo, either a cookie first or like a sandwich, but everyone can agree that it's one of the best wintry treats out there. And that makes sense, considering the snack is only manufactured between October and February, when winter officially hits the Holy Land. But fear not, this Crimbo Makeover won't touch the snack's recipe or taste, just its foil wrapper. And why is that a big deal, you ask? Well, probably because the wrapper of Crimbo is just about as iconic to Israelis as the logo of a Hershey's bar. That tried and true blue and silver wrapper is a welcome sight to hungry eyes when you enter a convenience store, and these little guys are usually sold out almost as soon as they hit the shelves, making that wrapper all the more iconic. Well, in an effort to do its part in helping protect our environment, the makers of Crimbo will be doing away with the old aluminum foil packaging altogether. All those wrappers combined account for nearly 13 tons of aluminum every year, a lot of which has found its way into Israeli waters and natural environments. Needless to say, the makeover is welcome news to environmentalists, and the bottom line here is that the taste will stay intact. And here's a little tip straight from ILTV: if you see a box of Crimbo, buy it fast, then stick it in the fridge overnight. A nice chilled Crimbo goes great with a cup of coffee in the morning.
A Bedouin community in Israel's Negev desert has just gotten a long-awaited gift, their first ever swimming pool. This is a pretty big deal for the Bedouin minority, not only because it finally put some aquatic family fun within reach for the first time ever, but also because many Bedouins say that they're consistently excluded from public Israeli pools in nearby Jewish communities, making this, for some, their first chance to go swimming, period.
The enormous new pool is part of a local country club facility in the city of Rahat. Rahat's population of roughly 66,000 civilians is almost entirely Bedouin, an Israeli minority group that speaks Arabic, serves in the IDF, and contributes to the country's civil services. But for all kinds of reasons, permission in Rahat from the government to dig their first ever community pool has been delayed by decades of red tape. The nearest pools are in neighboring Jewish communities in the south, where many Bedouin feel excluded and unwelcome. On top of this, having to drive the whole family across the country just for a dip in the pool kind of deflates the whole experience. Most people need only walk a few meters to their local pool, but now, after decades of waiting, Bedouin families will finally at least be able to find a pool within a reasonable distance. The groundbreaking ceremony will be attended by Israeli Agriculture Minister Uri Ariel and Culture Minister Miri Regev, as well as the Director General of the Development and Settlement of the Bedouin Authority, Yair Ma'ayan. For Ma'ayan, this is a long time coming, one which corrects a long lapse in promises made by the Israeli government. But at the end of the day, the real victory here is that kids in this community will now be able to cool off. Unfortunately, the pool opens just a week or two before the coming school year begins, so there's not much time to enjoy it before the summer break ends. But you can guarantee that next summer, that pool will be packed from dawn till dusk.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. As measles outbreaks increase 800-fold and counting this year, it's a good time to start thinking about vaccines. So today's word is chisun, meaning inoculation or immunization. It's not just people who need chisunim or vaccines. When we adopt a pet, for example, we also need to make sure that our furry friends are mechusan, or immunized. And remember that when someone gets a chisun or inoculation, they're not just protecting themselves, but rather they're also protecting everyone around them, especially those who can't get a chisun for themselves. So please consult your doctor, and together we can rid the world of some of the world's worst diseases that we've ever known. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be clear and very warm with a low of around 78 or 26 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect more clear and sunny skies with no change in temperatures and a high of 87 or 31 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.63 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for watching.